Thank you. Dobrý den. I hope I pronounced this correct. So let me give you a very brief introduction, and I'll be very brief just to set the scene. This is about vaccines, I understand. Where are we today with the vaccines? And I emphasize the word today because this is a fast-paced and fast-moving environment. You know very well, we have 3 vaccines authorized in the European Union. You know, this is Pfizer-BioNTech, Moderna, and AstraZeneca. As it stands today, we shall very likely have a 4th vaccine authorized by the end of this quarter. So we are talking 3-4 weeks roughly, and that will be by Johnson & Johnson. We have 2 further vaccines in what is called rolling review. If you want, we can talk about this later. And that is by Novavax and CureVac. So within a reasonably short period of time, we should have 3 more, hopefully. In addition to that, we are in close contact with, and as it stands today, 26 other manufacturers about other vaccines, and that is at the stage of what we call scientific advice. So we discuss with them what kind of data, what kind of evidence we are expecting to see from them. And then on top of that, we are still in loose contact, but that is more distant, so that is not imminent, with another around 50 to 60 companies who are also trying to develop vaccines. So there is a very strong pipeline that we have. Now, that's the new vaccines. We are also in the good position of already having safety updates. So this is not from the clinical development. This is from the safety of the first vaccine out there in the field. We get from these companies that have a marketing authorization, we get so-called safety updates at certain intervals in time. And we've already seen this, the first update from hundreds of thousands, if not millions of patients. And the good news here is that was for the Pfizer-BioNTech. And the good news is there was no additional safety signal. So in terms of safety, that vaccine seems to be performing exactly as we had anticipated, which is very good news, really. And we will, within probably a week or 2 weeks, have the safety updates from the other 2, sometimes in March, very likely. So that is the current state of play. Final word, we still stand ready because we know that speed does count. We still stand ready with all these new vaccines to go as fast as we can. We have 2 legal tools available to us. One is called conditional marketing authorization. That applies to emergency situations like the one we have now, where you make a trade-off between speed, how early can we license, versus the completeness of information. And the conditional authorization is a tool that we apply here, where we say, okay, we do want more data, but we understand the urgency, so we authorize today, but we give companies conditions. That's why it's called conditional. They have to do X, Y, Z additional studies. That's one tool. And the other is to speed up the process of the interaction between the companies and us. And that's called this famous rolling review, where we allow companies, something we don't do normally, to bring in data packages as and when they become complete. So we can shave off time off the assessment procedure at the very end, and that enables us to be as fast as possible under the conditions. So I propose I stop here, and now it's ready for you. Fire away your questions, please. Okay, well, thanks for your question. First, allow me to update you on, again, on the state of play of Sputnik, and I anticipated the question. So, I know there is many rumors. And as I sit here today, and that can change later this afternoon, it can change tomorrow, we have not received an application for authorization. Not for rolling review, not for any form or shape of authorization. Now, having said that, we have been and we are in contact with the developers of that vaccine. We have had exchanges with them in the space of what we call scientific advice. I mentioned that earlier. These are discussions where a developer of a drug or vaccine comes to us and says, what kind of scientific data do you need to see in order for you to give us a license, if everything goes well, of course. And there we discuss the types of studies, the type of how a clinical trial should be planned, how it should be executed, etc. So we have gone through that process with the developers of Sputnik. We have also done another thing, and that was proactive. We told them that if there is an application for marketing authorization, we would need to inspect their facilities, the production facilities. That is standard procedure. We do that with all the products, whether it's drugs or vaccines, doesn't matter, because we have to ensure and guarantee that the pharmaceutical quality, the manufacturing process, is up to standard. So that is what we have done. That is where we are standing today. And again, I cannot say where we will be standing tomorrow, because there could be an application. Now, that brings me to your second question. Could we force or ask someone to send us their data? And the short answer is, under the current, as an organization, as EMA, the answer is no. Because it is up to a manufacturer to come to us and apply for a marketing authorization. Don't forget, this is to allow someone to sell a product on the European market. If they want that, they need the authorization, but they, the developers, decide whether they want to sell or not. We have no say in that. We cannot tell any manufacturer, doesn't matter whether they sit in Russia or in Europe or in the US, that they have to sell their products. That's not our raison d'etre. That's not what we do. Now, whether a political level can do that is a very different matter. But then you're talking to the wrong guy here. We cannot do that. And that brings me to your last question. Do we get any political pressure? And I got that a lot. We hear that all the time. Do we get political pressure? And I would say we hear a lot that we should work fast. And that is fair. We know there is an urgency. We know that speed counts. But a political pressure in the sense that we should decide either this way or that way, or we should force someone to do this or that, no, that has not happened to us so far. Not. But we have announced that if and when an application comes, we need to see the way they process, they manufacture this, their processes, etc. What I was saying, I cannot comment on people's intention, and I will not. I can only tell you the experience we have. Now, you need to understand that placing an application for a marketing authorization of a pharmaceutical is not a trivial thing. This is a highly complex process, and we know that those companies with whom we deal year in, year out, that is the big pharmaceutical concerns, they know how to handle us, so to speak. They know what we require, how the process runs, etc. We always have issues, logistic issues, misunderstandings with so-called first clients, if you want to call it that way. So whether that is a small company in Europe, elsewhere, or whether that is a developer from outside the EU who has no experience with us, so it may well be that there are genuine discrepancies and genuine misunderstandings. Because that wouldn't be the first time we had those. Understood. But beyond that, please understand that I cannot comment any further.
Of course. Thank you.
Okay. Let me just take that down. So second generation. Yeah. So about the speed. I mean, that was a never-ending story and debate. And we had basically two options. One was to do what the US does, what the UK did, the so-called emergency use authorization, just go fast. And we decided, and there was a wide acceptance and consensus with that, that this is not the way for us to go. We have a high degree of skepticism about vaccinations, and the last thing we really needed was a rush emergency procedure. that could undermine the public trust in the vaccines. So the decision was, we will go as fast as possible, but we will go through a proper, thorough evaluation procedure, where all the problems can be addressed, they can be resolved, they can be discussed. That was the decision, and I would say that was the right decision at the time, because what we see now is maybe we were 2 weeks behind the British, and we are not behind others, because don't forget we have three vaccines on the European market. Even the US at this point does not have AstraZeneca. So that was, I think, the right decision, and we stand by it. That was up to now. Now, the world is changing fast. Does that mean we will do the same in future? Well, I don't know. We're in discussion about that. Is there anything we can speed up? And time will tell. So as you say, you're aware that these discussions are ongoing. Let's see what the result of that is. But let me now come to the important question of the second generation, because that is again a question of trust. Assume we will see a mutation of the virus, and that is, I'm afraid, I'm sorry to say, a perfectly realistic scenario. It may happen, yeah. And we need to modify the vaccines. Do we need the same level of data, of clinical trials, as we had for the first generation? And the answer in all likelihood is no. Why? Because we now understand the vaccine. We know that these vaccines are very safe. We know how to produce them now, which we didn't 6 months ago. That's why we have the bottlenecks. So, will we be able to authorize those modified vaccines without the large clinical trials? And these are the ones that are time-consuming. Doing a quick study in 100 volunteers and looking at antibody levels is fast. That's not the roadblock. The roadblock is always the large 10,000 plus patient studies. So we will probably be able to do without those in order to speed up the development and the authorization of those second generation vaccines. And that can be done with a very, very high degree of trust in both the safety and the efficacy, because of the experience we have already. So again, a very pertinent and topical question. I don't see a contradiction between what we said in our assessment and what you say the Slovak and others do the same. The Germans, the French, many do that. So is that a contradiction? No, not necessarily. We have to realize that knowledge or evidence doesn't come as yes or no, but it comes in shades of gray. So sometimes you have a better evidence basis to make a judgment, and sometimes that evidence base is smaller. Now, with the AstraZeneca vaccine, we have a very strong and good evidence base for the effectiveness and the safety in younger, and when I say younger, I mean below 65, younger people. We have some data in older, and when I say older, I mean over 65, older persons, and these data look good. There's no safety signal, but it was a very small number of people who got that. Therefore, to base a decision is more risky than to base it on a large number of data. That's understandable, I guess. So, but then we also look at the totality of data. That means, for example, we look at what is the antibody levels that have been elicited by the vaccine in the elderly. You don't need many people for that. And you can extrapolate from the young to the old. So there are many other types of data that you have. And when you look at the totality of the evidence, then we came to the conclusion that the benefits outweigh the risks in all age groups, and therefore we authorized it for all age groups. But we put a note in to be transparent that the evidence base is smaller in the old. So if someone who is a decision maker at, say, a national ministry or somewhere in the healthcare system says, look, we have two vaccines. We have, say, the Pfizer and we have the AstraZeneca. Why don't we go do it safe? We give the AstraZeneca to the younger people, and we reserve the Pfizer for older people. If you have that option, I think it is a perfectly rational option. I see no issue with that. And I think for the time being, nothing wrong. We will hopefully see more data on the AstraZeneca in the very near future, because AstraZeneca has been, or is still, running a large clinical trial in the United States with an emphasis on older people. So when that study is completed and we can read out the data, we will hopefully have as broad an evidence base for the older ones as we now have for the younger ones. So it's very difficult to give you an estimate. I mean, what I can tell you is that this vaccine, all these vaccines really consist of, you could imagine as two parts. One is the package, how you deliver the vaccine to your body, to the right cells in your body. And the other is the content. And that is like an instruction manual to your body to tell your body what to do with it. When we modify the vaccine, we will keep the package the same, or not we, but the companies. The package can be the same. Why? Because your body isn't changing. It's only the virus that's changing. So the package, for example, in the Pfizer vaccine, these lipid balls, they will remain the same. And it will be very fast to change the RNA that is in there. All you need is the sequence, and we're pretty good at identifying the sequences if we do, of course, the testing out there in the field. That's an important thing for public health. So as soon as we do the testing, we do the sequencing, and we find a new variant, that's fast. And then all you need to do is to modify the RNA inside. But the rest of the vaccine is the same. So how long will that take? Well, it's always difficult to give sort of timelines because I may be wrong and then I mismanage expectations. But I would say it would be more in the order of weeks than what it has been now, which was close to a year. So we should be much, much faster than we have been for the first generation. No, I use that as an example. But all these vaccines have what you could call a package. And with the AstraZeneca, it's a very different type of package, noted. But you still only have to change that little sequence. You don't have to change the vector, because again, the vector is specific to your body. The sequence inside, that is specific to the virus. So we only have to change one small but important detail. From the day we identify the need for a new vaccine, and that is day 0. What you mean is until we have it authorized, and that should be, as I say, very quick. But then don't forget, we have to redesign the process, the manufacturing process. So manufacturing has been, and that is sometimes overlooked, manufacturing was a much bigger hurdle, and is, well, we know it is, than the authorization. So we will have to revamp the processes, but again, that will happen much faster because for the first time, we had to start from 0. So the production capacity had to be ramped up from 0 to, well, wherever we need it. And this is happening right now. So all these production facilities can, of course, be used, because for a production facility, a factory, it doesn't matter whether you have this RNA or DNA sequence, doesn't matter, or another one. That's the same. So expect that, and that is the hope, to be much, much faster than it is right now. So I cannot tell you the whole story because we are still developing those criteria, and we're not developing those just for ourselves, for the EU. We are doing this on an international level in order to enable the global effort, because look, COVID is a global effort, and no one does anything just for the European market or just for the US market. It's global. So we have to come to an agreement with other global regulators like the US FDA, the Japanese, the Canadians, etc. And that is happening right now. So there will be a range of tests. For the pharmaceutical quality, it will probably be the same as for the first generation, but that is not the rate limiting step. It is always the clinical data that are the rate limiting step. And as I said earlier, you will have, so the lab tests, animal studies, etc., will probably be the same. That's fast. But for the clinical part, it will be some form likely, and I emphasize the word likely because I cannot preempt what the results of these discussions will be, but likely some form of demonstrating immunogenicity. It will not be the large protective studies, as I said earlier, with 30,000 patients. Well, it depends on what you are very well informed. Congratulations. What do you mean by process? Again, we will have to ensure that if there is a follow-up, and I presume your question is about the follow-up, the next generation vaccines, we will have to ensure that the immunogenicity is at almost the same level as it is for the first generation of the variants. So the process, I would say the overall process will be the same. The details, of course, will be very different of how this one. Thank you. So lipid shortage. For everybody to understand, the Pfizer and like the Moderna are RNA vaccines that are packaged in lipid vesicles. Think of a ball. Now, these are very specific lipids, and we are aware that there is a potential for shortages of the raw material, and that is why we are right now in touch with these companies to see whether we could look into alternative sources, because this is about sourcing of the raw material, basically. Can we already identify different sources for the lipids so that if and when there is a shortage, we can take recourse to product from other sources, and we can make sure upfront that these are up to the quality standards, the purity, etc., that we require. So that is a problem that is recognized and that may hit us, but we're taking preemptive action. The second question is about the drugs, okay? Vaccines are not everything. We need to treat those people who are in hospital. Now, there are drugs in the pipeline. There are many attempts. There were many attempts at repurposing, and I'm happy to explain what repurposing is if you want, please ask me, but I leave it for now. So the repurposing efforts, were unfortunately not very successful. We had some high-profile failures, think hydroxychloroquine. We had many other failures, antibiotics, other antivirals. What has so far survived is dexamethasone and remdesivir, and in all fairness, these are not miracle drugs. We now have, in rolling review, antibodies, and don't confuse that. That is not a vaccine. That is an antibody that is given to someone who already has the disease. So that is, in a way, passive immunization. So we are currently looking at a number of those products, and we anticipate, we hope, but I cannot guarantee, that we can authorize a few of those in the near future. Beyond that, yes, of course, there is plenty of other endeavors, plenty of other trials, but so far, I'm not aware of anything that is highly promising. But that is not to say that tomorrow we may not have many other therapeutic avenues. So there is a number of vaccines on the market in China, in development in China, yes. We are in touch with some of those, but again, that is at the level of scientific advice. So yes, they have approached us. Yes, we advise them, this is what we want, but we have not seen, at this point in time, a formal application. So what is different, and I come back to what I said initially. First, we use for the vaccines the so-called conditional marketing authorization. And again, conditional means we are satisfied that the benefits outweigh the risks, but there are still unanswered questions, and therefore we tell the company, look, it's not over for you. You get a license, but you still have to do this and that study to answer this or that question. The other is, as I said, the rolling review. That is to make it faster, but that is a purely procedural measure. That has nothing to do with the evidence then. And that brings me to your question, are we cutting corners here? And that was up from day one. That was the key questions. So do we insist on the highest possible standard of safety and efficacy? And the answer was absolutely yes. And we did that together again with international regulators. There was a broad agreement that for the first generation of vaccines, these are the ones we are seeing now and have, that there is an absolute requirement, and we will not waive that, to do the large protective efficacy studies. There was a debate at the very beginning. Should we cut corners? Should we be satisfied with a vaccine that just shows in, say, 100 volunteers that an antibody is produced after administration? And the answer was absolutely clearly no, because we know that would be water on the mills of the vaccine skeptics. We did not want this. We owe the European public a broad safety and efficacy base for the decision making, and that is exactly what we have. So my answer is no corners were cut. We have just been working faster. But if you look at the large data sets that we have, I think it is pretty evident that we have run the full course of evidence generation. And if you now look at the effectiveness information, and that is the data on how good is that vaccine, not just in clinical trials, but how good it is out in the field, then you must come to the conclusion that this was the right way to do. I read this morning in the New England Journal of Medicine the first data from Israel, and you may know that they are very far ahead in terms of vaccination in their population, and the protective effect in Israel in the field, not in clinical trials, in the field, was almost the same as it was in the clinical trials. So very effective, a true success story. And I think that should convince even those who are skeptic and say that was done very fast. Yes, it was done very fast, but it was also done very well. So as I said earlier, Novavax is in the rolling review, yes. Now, it's like the weather. You can predict the weather on the next day, but you're not very good at predicting the weather next week. So I can tell you for Johnson & Johnson, because that's very close now, Novavax is a little further out. So if you say the second quarter, probably yes. I cannot guarantee because, yeah, the further out you get, the fuzzier your predictions get. But yes, Novavax is in the rolling review. So it is, I would say, on the horizon. So this is the one that is, as I said, very close up in line. We expect it to get approval before the end of this quarter. Now, excuse me, we're now end February. The end of the quarter ends March. So we are looking at make it 4 weeks. Okay, so question one, Ivermectin. Well, of course, we are aware that there is hopes, shall we say, in ivermectin. But I'm afraid to say we have already seen a graveyard of hopes. And hydroxychloroquine was the most prominent one. We are not in a formal procedure about ivermectin. We are not aware that anyone will come to us with an application. Yes, there are studies. So I would say, let's wait. Yeah, we have seen anything from vitamin D to interferon. Much has been tried, not much was successful. So let me manage expectations in any announcement of wonder drugs that will stop this tomorrow. It may happen. Is it likely? I'm afraid no. Next question is, when will that whole spook end? Well, I'm sorry, I don't have a crystal ball. What we will likely, so what we know is the vaccines work. The vaccines work, they work even under real life conditions, which is the promise. The promise is being held. What seems to be the case, the vaccines, and I say seem because we haven't seen the data, we read whatever you read as well. It looks like if you look at Israel, if you look at the UK, other places, that the number of transmissions is coming down. So it is not just the severe disease, that is the most important thing, but it seems to be also, with cautious optimism, that it's also the transmissions. Now, when that happens, it would be a good thing, and we would probably be able to stop this virus. The million-dollar question is, who will be faster, we or the virus? This is like a race, like an arms race that we had in the Cold War. We power up, the virus powers up, and then we follow and so on. So how fast will we see a mutant that is resistant to the vaccines? And if that happens, and there is a probability, yes, that it will happen, as we discussed earlier, then maybe we will see a time when we have to learn to live with that virus in future. We have lived for centuries with the influenza virus, and we are in that arms race with the influenza virus since decades. We get a new vaccine, the virus mutates, we get a new vaccine, etc. So maybe that is the scenario. So I'm very optimistic that we will come out of that hole in which we are now. I cannot tell you exactly when, but it will happen. But will we forget about Corona? Not so sure. So I'm not entirely sure what you're aiming at, but maybe you're aiming at the emergency authorizations that we have seen in 1 or 2 member states. So members, the first question, I think there's a lot of noise here. Do member states disrespect our decisions? I am not aware of that. I mean, we authorize a vaccine and then it is out. We're speaking about vaccines now. Now, the European legislation has a provision that allows member states in emergency situations to take unusual steps, emergency procedures. Now, this is an emergency, so member states are allowed to do something that goes beyond the authorizations that we issue. And I think you may be speaking about the Hungarian purchase of Sputnik. So that has been discussed widely. That is an emergency procedure. That's fine. Will we, by the end of summer, have enough vaccines? I'm confident, but I cannot guarantee that by the end of summer, the majority of people in the EU who want a vaccine will likely have one. Because don't forget, we had the bottlenecks in the production where we're learning. So the companies that we have now on the market are coming up with their production quota. We will have the J&J vaccine. We have other companies that take over the production. We have new production facilities established. So I would be reasonably optimistic, let me put it that way. That's very difficult for me to predict. That's what I said earlier, because that is further out. CureVac is roughly, I say roughly, at the same stage as Novavax. So it also depends on how fast we will get the last bits of data in. And that is not in our hands. That is in the hands of the company. It will depend on how fast they end up the recruiting of patients, and even they cannot predict. It will depend on how fast they analyze their data, prepare it, etc. So that is really very difficult for me to say. But again, we are hopeful, and I emphasize the word hopeful, so don't hold me to it, that it will happen before the end of the second quarter. Hopeful. No, fortunately,
No?
I've not been, because my time hasn't yet come. I live in the Netherlands, and they go by age groups, etc. So while I'm old, I'm still not there. Sorry. So would I take the Russian or Chinese vaccine? Look, let me hark back to something that we all heard during the Cold War in the Soviet Union. Trust is good, control is better. And that hasn't changed. So if I can see the data, and that's what this whole thing is about, if we can see the whole data, if we can convince ourselves that this is up to standard, would I take it? Absolutely yes. Would I take it if I have not seen the data?